Tēnā koe te minita, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, Minister. Thank you very much for coming for us this morning. Obviously, we're here with the hat that you wear responsible for vote Tāri Whakatau. And as you're probably very well aware, we have a structured agenda, although some leniency on how we run that, but there's 4 primary areas of that structured agenda, starting with the Treaty of Waitangi negotiations. But before we jump straight into that, happy to receive some opening comments from you for a couple of minutes before we get into the agenda itself. So no mai harama. Excuse the noise there.
Right. Tēnei taku ihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou te katoa. Ka mahuta a matariki I te pai, ka mahuta o tātou tū manako ki te kau, which is my matariki whakatauki for you. When matariki arises above the horizon, our aspirations rise to the year ahead. And indeed, this is a government that focused on making good progress on many areas that we're talking about today. So look briefly, what I'd say is we're working steadily onwards in terms of treaty settlements. We've since the beginning of this year, we've passed legislation for Taranaki Maunga, Te Korowai o Wainuri Aurua, Ngāti Ngāhapu of Ngāti Ranganui. And we've also introduced legislation and had the first reading for Ngāti Haua, based in Taumaranui in central North Island, which is an important process. We've got lots of debates and discussions ongoing in that area, right across from, of course, from Ngāpui and Hodaki, and we can talk about the progress there. There's been a big change for the administration of how we've done this, and we've rearranged the department so to Tauri Whakatau, which means the office, essentially the Office of Settlements, the Office of Treaty Settlements and Takutai Moana has been focused on 2 basic goals, which is progressing the treaty settlements process and also Takutai Moana, the marine and coastal area. And so the other roles that were formerly had by Tarawhiti, particularly focus on Crown Māori relations, has been returned to Puni Kokori. That process was finalised in February and has worked very well. And so my colleague Tama Potaka can talk about the implications of that. So, just in general speaking, New Zealanders have been very interested in the whole settlement process. Started in the mid-90s, and 30 years on, we're broadly about 2/3 of the way through, and still with some significant work to do, which we're obviously trying best to achieve. Look, I think that's probably enough to say by way of introduction, and very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Minister. And we noting that I've just
introduced my team here. There's a new Chief Executive, Justine Smith, who's just arrived.
Kia ora. And we're going to go straight to Jenny. And the first area that we're going to concentrate on is the Treaty of Waitangi negotiations.
Kia ora. Welcome, Minister. If resolving treaty settlements is a priority for your government, why was this budget cut by nearly $40 million?
Well, I'm not sure where the $40 million came from.
38, I think it is. It's 38.645 million compared to the previous financial year.
Yeah, well, in terms of the basic sort of budget for treaty settlements, there's been a slight reduction from about 38 million to about 36, I think is the fixed figure. And that I think was, as the member will be well known, was something that was put in place by her government and previous governments as we progress the treaty settlements. There was a goal to taper down over time. Now, of course, the reality is there's still a lot of work to do, but like every element of the government across and every estimates hearing that we've moved, every estimates hearing that we've heard this week is this is a government that needs to be disciplined of its spending because we continue to have a massive deficit and a big increase in debt. And so this department did have a small saving, but the basics of it retains. The big difference between the overall budgets for this entity and the past is that a significant amount of it's been moved to TPK as part of the separation.
Right. So was it just the jobs that were cut that was that reduction of 8.7% or 38 million? Was that largely jobs?
Well, the greatest expenses in terms of employment, but they shifted, most of the roles shifted from this agency to TPK to carry on the Crown Māori relationships.
Was there a net loss?
Yes, well, there's been a small reduction in overall employment, but and that's been a relation of that small drop off from broadly 38 million to 36 in terms of the settlements.
How many times have you met with Malfoy, and what feedback have they provided on progressing a settlement?
I don't have the exact figure. I've met with them a number of occasions. The most memorable and positive occasion was when we met to initial a settlement for Kororipo Pa and the return of that very important site to Ngāpui. When a lot of New Zealanders will know where the stone store is in Kirikiri, and just over the river from that is the site of Kororipo Pa, which is very significant, where Hongi Hika was based, and others in the 1820s and 30s. So that was a very memorable and positive occasion. We've had a number of other interactions. The government is very keen to make progress on a broader Ngāpui settlement. And the good news is that after many failed efforts over the past on all sides over the government, there is, I think, a mood for a mood to make progress actually across. So with the primary focus is on getting the mandates delivered, and we're hoping to make have at least a couple of them done before the end of the year.
Have they indicated that they are ready to negotiate?
Some are, some aren't. I mean, there's always a wide variety of views. Some people want to get on with a settlement, others will say never, never. So what we're hoping to get, of course, is the majority of people being prepared to settle.
And are you open to dealing with more than one group simultaneously?
Yes, look, broadly speaking, I mean, our preference would be to have, if we could arrange one commercial settlement across Ngāpui and then recognise a number of sort of cultural settlements underneath that. It might be 6, might be 7. We haven't got a hard view on that, but and so to have some natural groupings across the region. But if we could, our goal, and is, if possible, is to get a single commercial settlement.
Malfoy has taken quite a strong stance against some of the actions your government has taken, whether it's the Treaty Settlements Bill, walking out of the Iwiches Forum, 7AA removal, the Māori Health Authority. Do you believe that some of the actions that your government has taken against Māori has impeded negotiations progress with Ngāpui?
No, I wouldn't. I think ultimately there's a, look, there's always a variety of views. Governments have been trying to get a settlement with Ngāpui for more than 20 years now. And so there are a number of issues that have delayed that. The Māori population, just like the Ngāpui population, don't all think the same. There's a variety of views across Ngāpui, and there are many that see huge opportunities to work with the government that's very keen to, has an instinct that empowers local communities to do things, frankly, in contrast to a sort of a more centralising impulse from the previous government. So there's lots of discussions being had around housing, lots of discussions being had around the delivery of public services at the local level. So while there are things that people disagree over, there's plenty that we do agree over, and plenty of scope for conversations to occur.
Last question on this. So just to be clear, you don't believe the actions your government has taken has detrimentally impacted on the Crown relationship with Malfoy?
No, I don't. I think we've got real good strength to build on, and I think there is progress to be made.
Right, move to Steve. Steve Abel.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you outlined, or at least Te Arawhiti now, Tari Whakatau, outlined an ambition of completing all settlements by 2035. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, ultimately, it's not something that can be forced by any government to state the obvious. A settlement requires two parties to settle. And so, look, I don't think I don't think the patience of New Zealanders as a whole is infinite, and people do want to see this process completed. But we're being as forward-leaning as we can to make progress. But I think it would be a massive problem for this country ultimately if we get to 2040 and we're still having these conversations. So we do want to make progress. That's why we're giving everything we can.
Isn't it potentially counterproductive if there's a sense that these settlements have been rushed, particularly where you've got complex multi-hapu iwi, where there may be, as you pointed out, parts of those iwi don't want to settle, and the sense that the government are kind of trying to push things along, isn't that counterproductive?
Well, that's always the tension. That's what we're very conscious of. And it may well be that that some groups will never settle, and that may be what they want, and we can't force that.
And what in terms of the disarray that's been created by the changes between Te Puni Kōkiri and Tari Whakatau, what is the impact on those settlement processes, the relationships that staff have had, the turnover you've got? I know we'll be talking about this later, but it does relate to settlements in terms of relationship basis for settlements so far.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't agree with the characterisation of disarray at all. I think we had we ended up having two agencies, Te Puni Kōkiri and Te Arawhiti, both being having at their heart developing relationships, and there was a sort of a duplication and an overlap and a confusion sometimes about the two different agencies and two different roles, and so we think it's actually simpler and clearer to have Te Puni Kōkiri primarily responsible for those Crown Māori relationships, and Te Tari Whakatau, the Office of Treaty of Settlements, focused on its core goals, which is advancing treaty settlements, and then also the marine and coastal area, and so to separate those two things. But of course, the two agencies have a huge level of interaction, and I think that's working well. Yes, whenever you make a change, there is a bit of a period of uncertainty and disruption, and I'm glad that we've got through that, and I'm very confident in the leadership of Justine here to keep this side of the equation focused on getting good progress.
Good. Dana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. I'm just interested just on the treaty settlement progress for Te Whanau Apanui on the East Coast. I note we spent a day with Ngāi Tai at Toreri, and that was a great day. But just a little bit further up, Te Whanau Apanui, the settlement was initialed in 2023.
Yeah, well, I mean, for people tuning in, Te Whanau Apanui is based on the east, the sort of the western side of the East Cape, going up, looking back towards Whakatane and Opatiki, but further up that coastline. And you're right, the previous government did initial a settlement less than 3 weeks before the election in 2023. It did include an unusual element, which was an agree to disagree clause over sovereignty. And I've just got the statement here. It included this statement from Te Whānau Apanui's position, saying that sovereignty has never been taken, ceded, voluntarily relinquished, or acquired in any way, in any other way, by a foreign power of government, including the Crown. And frankly, we're not comfortable with that arrangement. Ultimately, it would mean a settlement and the handing over of tens of millions of dollars to an entity which fundamentally doesn't accept the authority of the Crown to make a full and final settlement, as one reading of that. And so we haven't advanced that, and we're still in conversations with Te Whānau Apanui, but we're not prepared to progress that on that basis. And so that's a challenge that we're facing. We want to conclude treaty settlements, but we're not going to do it on that basis where you've got such a fundamental disagreement about the core sovereignty of the country. Our view very much is that sovereignty rests with the democratically elected government of the day, representing all New Zealanders. And we don't think a settlement based on that is appropriate.
Thank you. Just a substatement.
Yeah. Many iwi don't believe that sovereignty was ever ceded. So I wouldn't have thought that was a premise for settlements being possible.
Well, this would have been the first time that you had a settlement with an explicit agree to disagree clause in the settlement, where like I say, the people settling and say that they've never ceded, it's never been relinquished, never acquired in any other way. Now that was their view, and they're entitled to that view. But fundamentally, if we're coming to a settlement, which I think the broad public support for treaty settlements rests in large measure on those settlements being full and final settlements. Now it is an issue. That two parties in government and Parliament today, your party, the Greens, and Te Pāti Māori, effectively don't seem to agree with the idea of full and final settlements. But the National Party certainly does, and government parties, and as far as I'm aware, the Labour Party still agrees with that basic premise. And I think that's very important to the ongoing public support for treaty settlements. And that's a very significant element of that. And so what you're left, one reading of that agreement that was in that settlement, which is to say, yes, we'll take the settlement, but actually we don't agree with your authority to make the settlement. And I don't think that's a tenable position.
Can I clarify a little more on that? Because I appreciate you speaking about this. We may disagree on full and final settlements, but I'm pretty sure the leader of the Labour Party has also recently stated that the acknowledgement that Māori did not cede sovereignty. And I'm just wanting to zero in on the idea that by accepting a settlement, an iwi has ceded sovereignty. I think most iwi would reject that interpretation. Whānau Apanui, an interesting example, because unusually they still have 90% of their original land. And so for them, it would be surely a very significant concern to suggest that through the settlement process, they had ceded sovereignty of that land that they retain. But my main point is that surely there's a version of accepting that settlement can be done, but that is not a relinquishment of sovereignty on the part of an iwi.
Well, look, ultimately, the government's view has always been very clear on this, that the sovereignty was established by a process of constitutional and jurisdictional steps, starting with the signing of the treaty, followed by the proclamations by Governor Hobson in May 1840 and the gazetting of proclamations in May 1840, and then has been asserted and held ever since. Yes, people can debate about what was in the minds of people when they signed a treaty, but we're very clear that through a series of processes after that, the sovereignty is held by the democratically elected people of the day, as expressed through the government that we have in New Zealand. And we're not moving from that position.
Ana Rapiti.
Just supplementing off that, tēnā rā koutou, tēnā rā koe te minita. Just supplementing on to the partais before, around the Te Arawhiti Ngāti Tari Whakatau previously reported to the committee that some of the milestones that it would like to achieve by 2035 is all treaty settlements completed, one of those being Ngāpuhi, which obviously we talked about being our largest iwi and most complex iwi. The reality is that without a doubt, they're going to add in that clause that Te Whānau Apanui are stating as well. So what's the coping mechanisms moving forward in order, knowing that Ngāpuhi will probably have one of those clauses as well?
Well, that'll be form part of the settlement and as part of the discussions. But we're saying, very clearly that, I don't think there is a strong public mood in this country for the idea of multiple sovereignties. There can be lots of discussions around what tino rangatiratanga means in 2025 and 2030 and how that can be expressed. And I think there is room for discussion around that in terms of the provision of public services in the far north and control over one's destiny. But where it comes to sort of formal understandings around sovereignty, our view is that is held by the democratically elected government of this country, and we're not going to move from that.
Just another supplementary. And I'd kind of like to know where the government is in terms of their discussions and completing the Hodaki Collective.
Well, we're very keen to conclude those settlements. There's a number of them, and ultimately they've been finalisation of them has been held up by cross claims and debates on the boundary with Ngāti Whātua in central Auckland, the Tauranga iwi down on the Tauranga side, and also with Ngāti Rehua and others around Great Barrier Island or Aotea. And we're very focused on resolving those issues, and we're hopeful that we'll make progress, but ultimately, there's very strong different views. I've been working my way through that process as diligently as we can from our side of the equation, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get some resolution and get those squared away as soon as we can.
I'll just take one last question in this area before we move to the next slide.
Thank you. In discussions with Iwi Minister, has there been any coverage of the issue of water ownership and any potential or any of the treaty negotiations that you're currently undertaking?
Well, I'm not aware of any discussions of ownership of the actual water. No, there's always discussions around rivers and the sort of resource management discussions around that, but not of water itself.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move now on to the second area on our structured agenda. That's the takutai moana customary interests. Do we have an opening question from any member? Go, Steve. Yeah.
What is your response to the Supreme Court?
Well, what's else? I mean, our starting position on all of this is, a determination to acknowledge treaty settlements and commitments made in the treaty and including discussions around customary rights, while never losing sight of the basic expectations of New Zealanders to live in in a modern democratic setting where all New Zealanders will sort of have equality before the law and are broadly speaking an equal say in what happens in their environment. So we're very conscious that all New Zealanders have an interest in what happens in the coastal area, and the Takutai Moana regime insofar as that could lead to the granting of customary marine title, materially affects that. It gives the ability of a group that has customary marine title to make decisions in relation to resource management on a bunch of areas. So our view is that Parliament, when it passed the legislation, always had in mind a very high threshold for that, which had two legs, one based on tikanga and the second one based on continuous possession since 1840 and occupation and possession. So the Court of Appeal materially reduced that threshold. We introduced legislation to overturn that. Then before that legislation was concluded, the Supreme Court came in, and the government is still considering its options in response to that. And I can't give you a government decision on that, but we're actively considering that at the moment.
Do you think it's fair, the accusation that your introduction of the legislation before the Supreme Court finding was a knee-jerk reaction, and in fact the many wise commentators and observers suggested that it would have been better to tie-ho and wait and see what the Supreme Court says, and in fact the Supreme Court found in favour of the Attorney General's appeal?
No, I wouldn't say it was knee-jerk. It was interesting that the Supreme Court came to a conclusion so swiftly on that element. But no, we felt that we need to be clear about that. And so we have had three courts with three different interpretations of the legislation. And so obviously we're working our way through our response, which could range from leaving it as it is following the Supreme Court, or carrying on with the legislation that's been introduced in some amended form, recognising the Supreme Court decisions. And that's something that the government's working through at the moment.
What are the odds that you'll leave it as it is?
I won't put any odds on it. So.
Jenny?
Thank you. What contingencies, if any, have you allocated for litigation against the Crown?
Contingencies, well.
It's built into our budget.
Well, we've built it into the budget. If you want a precise figure, we could somebody could dig that out. But we.
The operating funding covers legal contingencies because Te Tari Whakatau is expected to instruct Crown law on any challenge.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we always have a legal interpretation.
Yeah, we'll just ask that if any responses come to the mic. We've got people online as well. That's right.
Thank you. Interested to know why you chose to ignore the Waitangi Tribunal suggestion that the government should halt all efforts to amend Takutai. And also,
Sorry, should hold for what? Sorry.
well, there was a Waitangi Tribunal recommendation that the government should halt all efforts to amend Takutai Moana. Do you agree with the tribunal that the current actions by the government breach the treaty?
Well, first, I disagree with your characterisation to say that we ignored the Waitangi Tribunal. We didn't ignore the Waitangi Tribunal.
What did you do then?
We read their report and considered it, and we didn't agree with it. That's a very different thing to ignoring it. And ultimately, the point I was making at the start is that what we're trying to balance is a regime that provides the opportunity for groups to make a claim based on customary title to the foreshore area against the very real interest that all New Zealanders have in what happens on their coastlines and in our seas. So we're a nation and a culture that obviously loves the coastline and is very interacting with it and live alongside it. They have, and so everybody's got an interest. And so what the legislation was trying to sort of pitch that at a particular level with a high threshold before customary marine title is granted. So it's very much within the preserve of government to have legislation in that space.
Have you got a timeframe when the government's going to respond to the current situation
In due course.
this year?
Well, look, I'm not going to put a timeframe on it, but we're actively turning our mind to it, and we're conscious of the fact that we do want to resolve these issues sooner rather than later. And broadly speaking, we are concerned about the whole framework that's developed. I am worried that we could see that the way that it's currently set up, we could be having court cases for many years ahead on these issues, and we could still be debating it in 2040. And so I'm worried about that, and so we're actively turning our mind to how we can come up with a more efficient process so that people can get on with things.
We know that in the past there's been unprecedented demand for financial assistance for applicant groups, application for customary rights in the marine and coastal area. What work has Te Tari Whakatau undertaken to review the settings and the operating model to manage costs within the appropriation?
My colleagues might like to comment on that a bit more, but the reality was that it was unsustainable as it evolved when I came. The previous government allocated, I think, $12 million a year for contribution to costs. When I took over the role, the projections was that it was going to blow out to 30 million. And our government did not believe that was sustainable, given the fact that we could be facing 20 years of this. And so we've instructed a need to have to stick to the broader budget. And that is challenging. And so we had, I think we've lifted it to 13 million, broadly speaking, for the next financial year, but it is challenging. And that's why we certainly are turning our mind to the whole framework to see if there's not a better way to do it.
Who have you consulted as a part of that work?
Well, it's not part of ongoing conversations, but we haven't made any particular decisions around that. But before we do, we'll certainly be consulting right across the board. But I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on that. No.
Have you consulted with any claimant groups as a part of that process?
In terms of formal changes to the process, because we haven't made any decisions around that, we haven't made have formal consultations around that.
So do you intend to consult with iwi at all in relation to the framework for that process?
Yes, I think there will be an opportunity to do so.
When?
When we make any decisions around how we can better arrange the whole framework for the resolution of these claims.
Thanks.
We have had some consultation around financial assistance scheme settings from December through to February, and alongside once we've considered the recent Waitangi Tribunal report on the financial assistance scheme, we'll provide some advice to the Minister.
What work has Te Tari Whakatau undertaken to understand the potential impact of Section 58 of the Marine and Coastal Area Taku Taimoana Act would have on climate funding, particularly for those groups that need to return to hearings?
Well, again, there might be some look. There would certainly, and it's a hyper. Well, based on the legislation that we had introduced, there was going to be a cost to potentially rehear elements of claims that were underway. Like I say before, the government hasn't made any final decisions about how we're going to respond to the Supreme Court yet, although we're still considering that. As previous envisaged by the legislation, there was going to be an extra cost, and we recognise that. And but our view was that those costs were justified in reorientating the whole regime in a more sustainable manner. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on that.
No, it's good. No, yeah.
Okay.
Just one more. Did the fact that the costings blowout impact your position you took? Was it just costing you too much? Is that why you've changed?
No, no. The fundamental sort of driver for change, as I indicated before, was that need to balance the legislative setup which allowed or provided for groups to claim customary title with the basic aspirations of all New Zealanders to have a say of what goes on in the marine and coastal space. And we felt that the Court of Appeal had come up with a threshold that was materially different to what Parliament or the government had expected. And so that's why we sought about changing that. But separately from that, the cost of the process that we're going through at the moment is very high, and we're concerned about that. And so the first step was to put some budgetary restraint around that, and that's part of a much broader focus on budgetary restraint across the government wide. But secondly, we do have to ask some pretty fundamental questions about the process.
Thank you.
Steve.
Yeah, just taking it a bit more broadly, Minister, is it reasonable to suggest that whakatau moana, the marine coastal environment in which diverse iwi have interest, and often those interests overlap?
Yes.
But of course, we're talking about essentially literally a fluid landscape where multiple interests can move across that space.
Yep.
And that in fact, recognising the sovereignty that an iwi retains to the whakatau moana does not threaten the access and use by other parties. And so the sense, I think, the feedback that we get from iwi is the sense of this removal of a recognition of sovereignty, or for iwi to have to go to great lengths and great expense to fight for recognition of sovereignty, which seems self-evident because, of course, iwi Māori have had use of that whakatau moana for centuries and centuries and centuries. Why is it that the Crown needs to clamp down and essentially have the effect of confiscating or extinguishing that sovereignty? Because it's not a barrier to use of the marine coastal environment by other interests.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people just trying to go about their business would have a different view around who is sovereign. I mean, that's a broader discussion, which we've already sort of talked about. But ultimately, the legislation that's drawn out would have the holders of customary marine title do have very significant powers in relation to resource consents and so forth. So people wanting to build a jetty, people involved in aquaculture, people going about a whole range of processes would have to have the permission of a local group, which is a very significant change to where we are at the moment, and not a material issue. And so our view has always been along that in order to do that, which is a significant deviation from the basic principle that everybody has an interest in what goes on in our foreshore and seabed. That is why there was a high threshold in the legislation.
There you go, supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Look, my supplementary, just with respect to, as well going on a broader level and a bit high level, back to your introductory remarks with respect to the shift, the restructuring of now Tari Whakatau to just focus on treaty settlements and whakatau moana. Are you confident that going forward with this focus on whakatau moana, things will also having that focus on that as opposed to other things will improve all the kind of mahi around this area?
Well, that's very much the goal. Yes, absolutely. Look, the agency now has, a very clear sense of direction that we want to pull out all the stops that we can in order to conclude more settlements. Recognising that you need two people to be part of a settlement, and we can't force things to happen if people aren't ready. And so so you can't control the timetable perfectly, but what you can control is our ability to be ready, prepared, innovative in our thinking, and diligent in doing the very best that we can. And so I think having a clear focus there, and then on whakatau moana, the marine and coastal area space, that the regime was set up with very good intentions and a very good focus, but it has become very slow and expensive and cumbersome, and so we've got a lot of work there to get that system working better.
Okay, let's now move on to the third item, which is the transfer of functions Tari Whakatau, or what was formerly known as Te Arawhiti, onto Te Puni Kōkiri. Any questions there?
Yeah,
Ginny?
thank you. Will there be any legislative changes to the Māori Development Act, given most of the workload from Te Arawhiti will be transferred? So, for example, Te Arawhiti did most of the organisation for events like Waitangi. And so will those staff and funding be transferred to accommodate the extra workload associated with it?
Well, yes, and that happened in February. So broadly, I think it's about $10 million in annual funding shifted from what was Te Arawhiti to TPK, and it's all in that space in terms of organising events and the Māori Crown relationship post the signing of settlements. What we had before, frankly, was a TPK that was kind of supposed to be doing that as well as Te Arawhiti doing that, and there was a confusion and an element of duplication. So that's why that's all now with TPK.
One of the functions was for Te Arawhiti was ensuring the public service has the capability to effectively engage with Māori. How will that continue to play out across other government agencies?
Well, that'll be a focus of TPK, so a big part of that is ensuring that government does what it says it's going to do in treaty settlements and manages that relationship. There's been a lot of treaty settlements passed with a whole host of things that should happen in relation to relationships between particular departments like Department of Conservation and the entity, and so part of their role now is to ensure that they happen, and that's their role.
In the past, Te Arawhiti had a role in consenting fast track legislation. Does that still occur?
Yes, I think it does. Yes,
It does,
yeah.
and so it hasn't changed, no change. How will that institutional knowledge be passed to Te Puni Kōkiri, and how will that operate? I know that you've already noted that you've lost staff in the transfer, but one of the assets of the Office of Treaty Settlements in the past is that institutional knowledge. What reassurance can you give members of the committee that will transfer?
Well, I've got every confidence that it will, in the sense of people have moved over, some have moved to TPK. Obviously, great expertise is retained in the Office of Treaty Settlement, but the Chief Executive might have something to say on that.
So in total, there were 44 FTEs transferred to TPK, but 24 people in practice. So a lot of the institutional knowledge has gone with those people, and they've been people who've worked with us for quite some time. We also developed quite comprehensive blueprints in relation to each of the functions. So that has been transferred to TPK. We have an information sharing agreement in place, and we have kind of ongoing conversations with TPK to make sure that it's as seamless as possible.
Quite often in treaty settlements, Te Puni Kōkiri would give separate advice, and sometimes it was a little bit different to what the Office of Treaty Settlements, they would be identifying where things could have been improved, almost acting as a peer review or a check on the Crown process. How does that work now, considering it's all happening in the same place?
Well, look, I think it's better to have strong, clear accountability for agencies as to who's responsible for what thing. Kari Whakatau, Office of Treaty Settlements is solely focused on doing those settlements, getting them done. And as we've discussed, there's a lot of work to do, and also the marine and coastal area space. TPK has a range of responsibilities, but it's clear that they are responsible for the post-settlement relationship and a host of other things. Now, in terms of, when we draw up a settlement, there's obviously a wide-ranging conversation across agencies as to what's the best way to, piece together the different elements of that. And there are, naturally debates and differences of views around that, but ultimately there's one clear line of accountability me as minister and the agency that puts it together.
So just saying that you're almost losing that extra check though, aren't you? Because it was a second check on what actions Officer Treaty Settlements were taken, and they were often held to account when some things weren't done as well as they could have been through that Spurunga Kōkiri advice provided.
No, but I'm not quite sure what you're saying in terms of TPK is now clearly responsible for the post-settlement relationship, and that I think it's better to have a clear responsibility line there, and I think that works well.
They still, TPK still retains its role in the mandating process and
Okay.
other bits, but.
Okay, thank you. How will Te Tari Whakato's performance reporting framework be finalised? And in terms of annual reporting and when updating its transfer function. So what are the main changes?
Well, I mean, it's all on the sort of yes, yeah, okay.
So we have two sets of performance measures. One sits in the strategic framework that I think has been provided to the committee, and that's for quite clear performance indicators that we then report on in the annual report. In addition to that, we have 24 performance measures that are part of our vote that we're accountable for. So that's also reported on in the annual report. So they're finalised at this point.
Has any particular impact on current and also completed treaty settlements identified any risks or issues with this transfer?
That I'm aware of.
Like you must have done a bit of a risk analysis. You're taking existing relationships and ongoing negotiations and it's being merged into another department. Have there been any risks identified in terms of the treaty relationship or ongoing negotiation stability as a result of the change the government has made?
No, I wouldn't have thought so because the core of the negotiating teams were with Te Arawhiti and now they're with Te Tari Takawhau. So the core teams are still in place. And I'd say the main difference is that now that there is no other sort of role that they're supposed to be undertaking, that they're clearly focused on the need to negotiate those settlements. And part of that, of course, is building relationships in the process of doing that.
Thanks.
Steve?
What is the number of people who have discontinued work in either agency, who've opted not to accept the transfer, who have, it's a high staff turnover? What are the rates of loss of people?
So we have, we currently have got 137 staff at Te Tari Whakato. There was a transfer, as I've said, of 44 FTE, in practice 24 people. But in terms of people that declined to stay in either agency, do you have around 9 people undertook redundancy, volunteered to take redundancy.
Which is a pretty high rate, isn't it?
Well,
I
wouldn't have necessarily, actually. I would have thought the vast majority stayed. And look, I think everybody recognises that when you're going through a restructuring, it is, nobody enjoys that, and it's a time of transition, and it's uncomfortable. I'm pleased to say that we've come through that, and certainly my role as a minister, and certainly through the chief executive, is to motivate and encourage the team, who, in my experience, certainly, most of the people who work in this setting are very highly motivated themselves to achieve something for this country in terms of progressing this treaty settlement process that has been, like we said at the start, a bipartisan project for a very long period of time. It's a challenging project, but people who work there are pretty dedicated to that, and we certainly, in my every interaction I have, is to be highly encouraging of their efforts in that, and so I think the new chief executive has come in and is very focused on having a highly performing and cohesive team.
So in the context of I would say governmental policy position with a suite of legislation that serves to undo a lot of progress we've made in the Māori Crown relations space, you're saying there's still high morale in the agencies?
Well, again, I wouldn't. I mean, the term you use around undermining is a negative one, and I wouldn't agree to that. If I think of wearing my justice hat of the things you do, there'll be a lot of people who would stand up and say, tougher sentencing legislation is anti-Māori. I disagree with that entirely, because our focus is on reducing the number of victims of crime, and Māori are more likely to be victims of crime. And so, yep, there's differences of opinion and different views on all of those matters, and they're all highly debated, and that's natural. But we're a government that's focused on improving outcomes for all New Zealanders, including Māori, and we would never suggest anything otherwise. So are you telling me that there'll be people working in agencies across Wellington who won't necessarily agree with everything the government does? Of course, but our job is to focus their minds on the project that we have in front of us, which is to advance treaty settlements, and we're absolutely determined to do that.
But in that space, you're as a government have sort of uniquely attracted a number of excoriating Treaty of Waitangi tribunal findings. You would surely acknowledge that as treaty minister.
Well, yes, there's been a few reports, and it has been I suppose we have seen more examples of the tribunal commenting on government policy even before it has been concluded, and holding panels and making observations on things where the government hasn't actually finalised its policy yet. So yes, there's been a lot of that, but we're not going to be deterred from what we set out to do in our coalition agreements and what we promised the country that we're going to do. Even if it hurts Māori Crown relations? Well, look, you seem to be sort of implying that when you talk about Māori Crown relations, that there is a single Māori view, and there isn't. Of course, there's, we're talking about 1 million people, and there's a wide variety of views. Our cabinet now includes a number of Māori with a wide variety of views on every topic, and so the relationship is broad and deep, and yes, there are points of contention between different elements and different groups, and that's just part of the normal process of democracy, which is a robust one, and people are ultimately accountable.
Given those statements and the wider framework of the government, do you have any planning or programs in place for retaining staff in Te Tari Whakatau?
Yes.
So at the moment, retention for our office is affected by a couple of things. One is the size of the office. So we lose a couple of people and it shows up as a kind of disproportionate percentage. It's also a place where our people work directly with Māori. That's a capability and experience set of skills that is in high demand across the public service. So we often lose our people to other parts of the public service. And I think in terms of tracking reasons why people leave, we have exit interviews with all of our staff who leave. What we find is it's often a development opportunity, travel or personal reasons. Having said all that, we are very keen to retain our staff and to do more around that. So we are kind of post-transfer of functions to TPK, reinvigorating and refining a new people strategy that has one of those, its goals is around retention of our people.
Given a number of decisions and positions your government has taken, do you find it hard to attract Māori to come and work at Tari Whakatau?
I'm not sure I could comment on that, actually. Anything to...
No comment.
I'm here. Oh, look, there's no doubt that the current environment and the mahi itself is challenging, and being Māori in that mahi. So I had asked myself that before I came to Te Arawhiti and Te Tari Whakatau. you know, there are challenges in the way of thinking, there are challenges in the mahi that you have to do with your people. So there's no doubt that that's a factor.
Yeah, and look, I mean, broader point I'd make is that it is a challenging space, and you know, when we talk about those issues around sovereignty, you know, they're not easy conversations to have, but you know, it's better than the alternative, which is not having those conversations. And I think as a country, it is very important that we continue to debate these things. But I think New Zealanders expect from any government of the day that we're clear in our position and our views. But we continue to have discussions and debates, and the fact that we keep talking is a good thing.
I don't disagree with your position, Minister, but I do put it to you that the position that you and your government has taken on a number of treaty issues would make it less attractive for Māori to want to work in Te Tari Whakatau. Again, you're implying that Māori all think the same, and there's a wide variety of views, of course, and so yes.
Right, Daniel.
Just supplementary to the kōrero around Māori Crown relations. So Minister, you touched on this earlier. Our young chair for Ngā Kohi, Mane Tahere, he recently reached out to a few ministers about the challenges they're having over there. And would you see that as him trusting in you and seeking the guidance of some of our ministers and seeing that he is comfortable enough to go to our ministers and talk about some of the challenges in Northland over there?
Well, yes. I mean, I think right across the country there are you know, just countless incidents, examples of government in the broadest sense working with people who are close to local communities and have a better understanding of what's going on. And our sort of general philosophical view in the National Party and the government that we have is that you know, faced between a choice of a Wellington-based group of people trying to sort of sort out a problem in Kaikoui and a local group in Kaikoui understanding what's going on, that you're probably more likely to get a better outcome from a local group. And that's why we continue to have many arrangements right across the board, including with many groups of Ngāpuhi, different hapu of Ngāpuhi. And so that is, you know, I think important, and it continues to grow, and there are real opportunities, not just in the justice space, but in the housing space and the social services space. And that I think is something that we can build on, and as part of the settlement process as well. But it runs in parallel, I suppose, to the process. But yeah, ultimately, you know, we continue. You know, we're a government that's very focused on outcomes. So you know, when we're faced with these challenges, you know, we want agreements made. You know, we're interested in getting good outcomes.
Okay, I'll ask that we move now into a final area, which is about the government priorities and the proposed departmental spend as such.
I think we've covered most of that, haven't we?
We've actually talked a little bit about that, but any other supplementary questions of what's already been asked in that space?
Yeah, I've got a few, yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Te Arawhiti was established back in 2018 by Kelvin Davis, and his intent at that time was that Te Arawhiti will support the Crown in being a better treaty partner. Is honouring the treaty important to you?
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, I don't like to be critical, of course, of the previous government, but I think that quite often comes up in government that the government of the day might not be happy with the effectiveness of a government agency that is supposed to be doing a particular role. And there's two ways to deal with it. One way is to say, let's get that agency doing the job properly. The other way is to create another agency to do the job that a current agency is supposed to be doing and isn't doing well. And I think that's ultimately what Mr. Davis did by not, recognising that TPK wasn't doing the job as well as they wanted in that particular area, and then creating a new agency to do it. And our view is that as a result of that, you ended up with a duplication of effort and confusion on those two roles. And so our view is that didn't really work. And you'd go to major events up north and you'd have two government agencies kind of responsible for it. And so we wanted to simplify that.
What work has been done so far for Waitangi Day planning for next year? And has there been any discussion about whether the lower marae will be held, used for ceremony?
Well, that ultimately rests with TPK now. And so I'm sure it'll be part of the ongoing discussions. We want to make sure that all New Zealanders feel they can celebrate our national day. But as to exactly what's going to happen is ultimately not decided yet.
Are there any key fiscal risks to the vote that might be more challenging in 2025 compared to previous year, 25-26, compared to previous years? And if so, how are they proposed to be managed?
Well, I think the primary sort of pressure point, I think, and I'm happy to sort of have the Chief Executive add, is the payments for claimants in relation to Takutai Moana, which we've talked about. Yep, the demand is high and our ability to fund everything is constrained, and so that's a continued area of focus. And then in terms of broader risks, in terms of the treaty settlements, if we were phenomenally successful in a very rapid rate, then we'd have to make some adjustments. But that's something we can manage if and when required.
How much has been budgeted for the relativity clauses in both the Ngaitahu and Tainui settlements?
Well, look, we've got, I think, what is it, $350 million in for overall settlements, but ultimately the government of the day, as every government in the past, is if we conclude a very large settlement, then we find the resources, and then that obviously has implications for the settlement. So the government at each particular point when it makes a decision around a major settlement will have to will have to find the funding for it.
Ana Rafiti.
Yeah, building on from the OAG's recent April 2025 report, is there any new money for new policy initiatives in Vote Tariwhakatau by 2026 to innovate the historical treaty settlement processes for remaining iwis to be set?
Well, not new money, but I regard that as core function of the agency, which is to constantly be asking itself how best one can bring about progress on the settlements.
You got these two?
You're right, you finished there? Okay, Jim?
Yeah, I just had one more. In terms of Te Tari Whakatau, Tarawhiti, your sort of goals or milestones by in the next 10 years by 2035 is to have all treaty settlements completed and all treaty settlements successfully implemented, all promises met, and all Takutai Moana determinations are made, and the current process is no longer required. Is that realistic?
I think I would describe it as challenging. I think we will give it everything we've got in terms of the treaty settlements. There's obviously some still significant settlements to be done, particularly around Ngāpui. We hope to have the Hodaki ones dealt with in a timely fashion. There's about 13 or 14 groups yet to get to the mandate phase, which is the sort of starting of negotiations. So it's, I think it's a worthy goal there. On our current trajectory, if you're looking at the marine and coastal space, the Takutai Moana, we're not going to get there. And so that's why we've got to have some sort of, I think we do need to have a real hard think about how we do that.
In terms of some of the complexities around resolving all treaty settlements, what do you see as the biggest challenge to reach that goal of all treaty settlements completed by 2035?
Look, I think that the challenges and broadly speaking, we've been doing this for 30 years, and the ones that haven't settled yet are by definition, the more difficult discussions. If you go up to Ngāpuhi, you'll hear voices saying, "Come on, it's time to get on with this. Let's start serious discussions," and then you'll hear other voices saying, "Never, never." And so the legitimate positions, and ultimately, no government can, force the issue. Ultimately, people have to be prepared to settle. And when we look at the progress that has been made by iwi who have settled over the years, and most obviously Tainui and Ngāi Tahu, but if you think of the progress being made by Ngāti Whātua and a whole bunch of groups, I think there is a very good story to tell and a real good opportunity. If we think of Northland, for example, I constantly say the two things that would make a real difference in Northland would be a decent road, and secondly, making progress on the Ngāpuhi settlement. And so I think there's real opportunities.
Do you think that the Crown's treaty settlement framework needs to change in order to make it more realistic to achieve all settlements to be reached in the next 10 years?
I think, like every area of government, there is we should be asking sort of basic questions about how we do things, and is it too slow? Is it too cumbersome? Do we have to do it this way? Have to do it that way? When we think of the things that and the mix of things that we offer, I think that's constantly something that we have to be given thought to. Yes.
Do you think we need to make settlements more substantial, given the inflation and the current financial pressures that iwi find themselves in? Some of the quantums in treaty settlements don't enable iwi to provide as much as they would like to for their people. Given the current fiscal headwinds the country finds itself in, do you think that should be taken into consideration when calculating the quantum for treaty settlements?
Well, inflation should be, yes. Yes. On the other hand, there is, obviously there is a missed opportunity for those who don't settle or do take longer to settle, and so that's something that everybody's conscious of. So yes, but the amounts that we spend and the various elements of settlements, very much a point of that's the sort of core, sort of some of the course discussions that we have. But we obviously durability is an important element of that, and so and also public support for the broad settings, because ultimately the money that we're spending on this is money that we're broadly struggling to spend money on hospitals and schools and things like that, and so there's pressure everywhere.
Steve.
For those iwi who have not settled, or those who don't want to settle and may never settle, what is the problem with legislation your government has passed which only recognises settled iwi?
Well, that is part of the process. I think when I think of the many broader pieces of legislation that we sort of encounter, such as the the RMA context and things like that, that there is a role for local Māori to contribute, regardless of whether they've settled or not. But I don't know if there's any particular observations that you had to say on that. I think there's clearly advantages in settling and having a clear sort of entity which government deals with, but it's not a total block, obviously, for ongoing relationships prior to that. And as we're talking about, there's a whole heap of things that many government agencies do with various hapu of Ngāpuhi up north right here, right now, and have been for many years. And that hasn't been stopped or blocked by the absence of a treaty settlement so far.
But do you see that there's a potential perception of sort of a coercive quality to a removal of recognition of te tiriti broadly from a given piece of legislation whilst at the same time recognition of a settled iwi might be retained, while you do acknowledge that it is the right of iwi to not settle and not set, I mean, settlements are to make some token amends for the impacts of colonisation. They're not impacting on Te Treaty of Waitangi as a constitutional agreement.
Yep. Look, I mean, is it, it's probably Shane Jones. Look, yes, look, I mean, I think all those, I would look, that's all just part of the broader conversations that we have as a country, and we'll all have our different views on that. And, you know, the broad way that I characterise it is that Parliament has passed and agreed to various treaty settlements, so we're not in the business of you know, we are committed to those, and we'll absolutely do that. In terms of, you know, the broader treaty relationship and role of that in government, it's a constant balance between those aspirations and expectations, and also the aspirations and expectations of all people living in New Zealand in a, you know, a modern democratic society. And so you know, there's always a tension between those things, and each government tries to navigate its way through that as best they are. We as a government will, you know, will never lose sight of the basic expectations of all people living in this country to have a broadly equal say in what goes on in their environment, and so that's important.
So you rightly made the point that it's appropriate that a local iwi who are directly impacted by a given development or project or activity should have some say in that. But where is the pathway to that? And for example, the fast track legislation, which doesn't recognise that iwi if they're not settled, and doesn't recognise Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Yeah,
I think isn't this an example of exactly where that
Just gotta be
iwi
careful that we're
getting a little bit off.
with the purpose
Yeah,
of today's
we're getting a little off track in relation to that. But look, all I can say is my focus as Treaty Negotiations Minister is to make those settlements, make new ones, and we're about two-thirds of the way through the, you know, the multi-generational task that we've begun. We want to make further progress, and our hand is willing to settle and to have good discussions, and that's my focus. Yeah.
Okay. Unless there's any burning last questions from anybody.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to summarise by just saying thank you very much for coming before us and engaging with us. I think we've had a good line of questioning this morning, but I also want to acknowledge the very important role that Te Tare Whakatau has in our relationship with Māori, with the settlements and everything that has been done and is to be done. And it's a you know, this committee's purpose here is about bettering Māori outcomes, and this plays a very important part of that. So I acknowledge the work that the Minister, the executives and the Kaimahi do in actually providing that outcome. So
Yeah, well, thank you. I'd like to sort of, you know, amplify that. We've got a very hard-working team and they're doing a great job.
Thank you very much. Kia ora. Kia ora tata.
Thank you.
Yeah.